are back with comedian David Boyle, and I'm quitting alcohol. And Jesus Christ, who would have thought that the most controversial thing I've said on this podcast is that Andy Murray is from England? That is enough with the messages coming from Scotland. If you don't shut up about Andy Murray, I'm going to start calling Billy Connolly fucking English too. The great English comedian Billy Connolly. Fuck me, you Scottish cunts took that personally. One listener sent me a message basically saying Andy Murray is Jesus of Scotland and he survived a fucking school massacre or something by deflecting the bullets with his tennis racket or something. You are really putting Andy Murray up there on a pedestal, aren't you, Scotland? Didn't he only win 2 Grand Slams? Leighton Hewitt won 2 Grand Slams, and if anyone asked me where he's from, I'd say fucking New Zealand. And not only that, Scotland, didn't you recently, like in the last couple of years or few years, didn't you have a referendum to become a republic and you voted no? You all decided to suckle the bosom of the British Empire for a little bit longer, didn't you? That's on you, not me. I'm sure that was none of you cunts though. That's old cunts. The same thing happened in Australia. We're still part of the British Empire in Australia. All our soldiers have to sign a contract to the Queen. And I think the police do too. And we had a referendum to become a republic as well. And everyone voted no too. But that was all old cunts. Young people didn't even show up. And all the old cunts came out and voted for the Queen. So when COVID-19 came around and everyone was saying it was only killing old people, my first thought was Australia's going to finally be a republic. We're going to get rid of those old cunts. Who else would vote to keep the Queen except old cunts? I will admit, though, I did forget Andy Murray was from Scotland. It's the first mistake I've ever made on this podcast. I completely forgot, actually. Do you know why? Because the Australian media never made a differentiation between Scottish people and English people. If you're pale white and you sulk, the Australian media just calls you English or British or whatever. I think they were calling him British. I think that's where the confusion was for me. They would say the first British male tennis player to win Wimbledon since some bald cunt with a wooden tennis racket. But it's good to know I've got a lot of passionate Scottish listeners out there. The fighting spirit's still in you. Maybe you should have used a little bit of that fighting spirit to save Mel Gibson in Braveheart, huh? Then we wouldn't even be having this conversation, would we? Also, you cunts better come out to Edinburgh if I do it next year. Then we can argue about Andy Murray, who doesn't even have a Scottish accent at all. No, I love you Scottish cunts. You're a lot like Australians, except much uglier. I had a good friend. Well, I wouldn't call him a good friend, but I had a Scottish friend during my 20s. Well, he wasn't really even my friend. I'll tell you what our relationship was. His name was Paul Mackey. Paulie, he was a good man, very good man. Haven't spoken to him in probably 10, 11 years, but he hung around our crew for a good 2 or 3 years there. He was part of our crew. How he became part of our crew was one of my mates, Morgan, met him in India, and Morgan's a sweet-talking motherfucker. So Morgan convinced Paulie to come to Australia and move out to Bathurst, which is like 3.5 hours outside of Sydney. That's where we were all doing university at the time. Well, obviously I wasn't attending. You know my university history by now. So anyway, Paulie flies into Sydney and my mate Morgan is at work. So Morgan gives me a call and he says, hey, this guy I met in India, Paulie, he's a great dude. He's flying into Sydney tonight. Do you mind taking him out for a drink? And I'm like, yeah, no worries. He can come with me to this thing I'm going to. And that thing I was going to was one of our other friends who was in a band was playing at the MTV Lair or something like that. I forget what it was called. But he was getting filmed for the MTV Lair thing. And Alice Cooper was going to be there that night, which I didn't even really care about. That is not what tipped me over the edge. What tipped me over the edge to go was free alcohol. So I'm like, yeah, no worries. We'll get him another ticket and he can come down to this MTV Lair thing. So I meet Paulie at a pub near where the Lair is and we start having a few drinks. That's all sweet. Paulie's a good guy. And we're like, let's head into the Lair. So we head into the Lair. My mate's band's playing. Alice Cooper's right there. There's only like 40 or 50 people in the venue. Alice Cooper's right there. Like, I'm standing right next to Alice Cooper. Paulie's mind is blown because he's just walked into this place. It's free booze. Alice Cooper's there. Someone's playing guitar. The guitarist in the band my mate played in, the guitarist went right into Alice Cooper's face. Alice Cooper was just sitting down there and just started strumming in his face. It was the most awkward thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Alice Cooper's like, what the fuck is this cunt doing? Anyway, I couldn't have cared less about Alice Cooper. All I cared about was getting my tank full, getting my money's worth out of the free ticket to the free booze thing. So I just start hammering the bar. I also had no money as well. So I'm really hammering the bar like it's about to shut any second. And by the time we left the lair, I was so fucking drunk, I could barely walk. But I'm like, all right, let's go to the cross, Paulie. I'll take you to the cross. He's like, yeah, man, that sounds sick. So we go to King's Cross. I don't get let into like 3 or 4 places. We finally go to some dank bar. I can't even remember what it was. I have a couple of beers. I pretend to go to the toilet and I just walk out. I walk out, I turn my phone off and ditch poor old Paulie in the middle of King's Cross. He had no money either. He came to Sydney with like a couple $100. So I just left him there waiting. I did the Irish goodbye. I barely made it home myself. The next morning I turned my phone on. My mate's angry at me. Paulie had slept on the street or something like that. He was wandering around all night. I think he may have spent his $200 and poor fucking Paulie. And he ended up going to Bathurst the next day, moving in with one of my mates, and they lived together for a couple of years. So that was the first time I saw Paulie. And then the last time I saw Paulie was probably even worse. He had a pretty big freak out on the acid, and I think it was all my fault. I think he blamed me for his freak out, which I have to agree with him. It probably was my fault. It's actually a pretty good story, that one, but it's a to be continued. I'll tell you about the last time I saw Scottish fucking Paulie. Paulie Mackey or Mackay. I think it was Mackey. Paul Mackey. There's only like 12 cunts in Scotland, isn't there? You probably know him. But I'll tell you about Paulie's acid freak out another time. Anyway, that's it for tonight. If you're enjoying the podcast, share it around with your friends. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you the fuck later.